As the author of Vested Outsourcing, 5 Rules That Will Transform Outsourcing, Kate Vitasek is a respected and vociferous critic of the vast majority of outsourcing agreements and deals. I started by asking her what the term vested outsourcing actually means.
Well, the concept of vested outsourcing came about as part of a research project that we've been doing at the University of Tennessee. The university is number 2 in the world in the area of supply chain research, and the United States Air Force had given us a research contract to study how to make outsourcing better. They outsource $34 billion worth of outsourced services, and for them it's very important that they improve their efficiencies and effectiveness of outsourcing. And under the research, we studied some of the world's very best outsourcing deals, those who had won Supplier of the Year awards. And we asked ourselves what made these deals very successful. And they all had one thing in common. They really created a solution where the service provider and the company had a vested interest in each other's success. So they were crafting the business model, the relationship, and the contract in alignment where everybody was a winner.
Okay, so it's very much overcoming the hurdle of traditional outsourcing models where you dump a problem that's been with the company on somebody else and pretend it'll go away. I mean, that never works really, does it?
No, actually, one of the sayings in the industry is outsource your mess for less. And now there's a rallying cry, don't outsource your mess for less, fix it first. Well, under vested outsourcing, you do want to outsource your mess, but you want to outsource for the service provider to bring their expertise and transform your mess into world-class or a much better solution than what you have.
Right, okay. And I mean, we've touched on it a little bit, but maybe you could provide a little bit more focus on what you see as the reasons behind outsourcing generally being a bit broken and not really delivering the value that it should do and could do to many companies.
Well, I like that word you use, outsourcing is broken. We like to say the same thing. There are actually several reasons why today's outsourcing business models are broken. We actually in the book identify these as ailments, and we have 10 common ailments that most companies have when they outsource. I'll highlight 2 of them for you that I think are very interesting. The first one's what we call the outsourcing paradox. And that is when a company outsources to the expert and then tells them exactly how to do the work. So they have these detailed statement of works, and of course you're going to get what you've prescribed. And why bother to prescribe something if you have already deemed yourself as not being a core competence? The second ailment that we really like to point out and that we see very frequently is what I'll call the activity trap. And the activity trap happens when we have a transaction-based business model. So we've outlined these activities and the service provider is getting paid for those activities. Well, there's really no incentive to eliminate non-value-added activities. Why solve the problem when I get paid an activity, a transaction fee to actually do the activity?
Okay, and you, I mean, there's been quite a lot of interest today, actually, in what you've been saying and what you've been talking about. I mean, tell me, is there a bit of a buzz around this? Are people beginning to wake up to this as being, one, a problem, and this a potential solution to that problem?
Absolutely. We are seeing quite a bit of buzz around this, especially with companies who do a lot of outsourcing. Today, the outsourcing market is estimated to be $6 trillion. So large companies have, got onto the outsourcing bandwagon. They followed Peter Drucker's advice, do what you do best and outsource the rest. And now they feel like they just aren't getting the effectiveness of these outsourcing relationships, and they're challenging themselves and asking, is there a better way to outsource? And that's really what our research has done, is written rules and a process that helps companies follow a better way to outsource.
Okay, and we'll get onto those rules in a little bit. I mean, I know that you've got 5 golden rules, I think you call them, but from my experience, CPOs haven't always been really in charge of the strategy behind outsourcing decisions, and they haven't been completely involved in this from the very beginning. Is that your experience too, and if so, how can that change?
Well, a great question, and actually what we see is one of 2 things happening. Either the chief procurement officer is involved in outsourcing but doesn't have the business experience, or the business groups themselves are involved with outsourcing but lack the procurement experience. And in a good vested outsourcing deal structure, you bring procurement and the business together, and the service provider who's the expert. And together you craft a business model, a relationship, and a contract that is going to bring you sustainable competitive advantage. It's going to challenge the way that you do the work today and transform it into more efficient and effective ways to managing that work.
Okay, so why don't you tell us a little bit about the 5 rules that you've highlighted for successful outsourcing?
Well, I mentioned that all these companies have followed Peter Drucker's advice to do what you do best and outsource the rest. Well, it was kind of like the Wild West. There are really no rules today. So what we've done is codify these unspoken rules that we found in these successful relationships. And so I'll highlight each one of them real briefly for you. Rule number 1 is to have an outcome-based versus a transaction-based business model. We talked about that activity trap. We need to really focus on the desired outcomes and get out of the mode of contracting for a transaction. Rule number 2 then is to focus on the what and not the how. One of the particular challenges that we have is that we write these very detailed statement of works and tell the supplier exactly how to do the work. We want to get out of that, tell them what we would like to achieve, what are those results we're looking for, and not tell them how to do it. We want that supplier to bring their expertise. Rule number 3 is clearly defined and measurable desired outcomes. If we're going to move to this outcome-based model, we better for sure know exactly what success means. How do you define success? How do you measure success? And how do you pay for success? Which leads straight into rule number 4, a pricing model that has incentives to optimize for that cost-service trade-off. When you know what success is, it usually involves solving the hard problems, right? I like to call it the power of the and. Anyone can reduce their cost at the expense of quality or at the expense of service levels. It's the hard challenge is to optimize for cost and service trade-offs. And when we do that, we can get the power of the and, or what we often call a trade up. And we need to have incentives that reward our suppliers for solving those hard problems and bringing their brain power versus just having a butt in a seat and paying them for the butt in a seat. So we want to flip that economics of that deal to pay for that brain power. And then the 5th rule is a governance structure built on insight versus oversight. All too often we see that companies are micromanaging their suppliers and have a large vendor account management group that is performing a lot of the tasks that really are duplicated within the service provider. So we want to get out of that micromanagement mode. We want to move away from oversight and into one that is insight, where we're managing the business together. And again, together, the companies are better. We like to use the analogy of baking a pie. Why try to come and divide up that pie and take the profits away from that service provider to reduce your cost? Why don't we take our capabilities and think of those ingredients? And those ingredients, we're going to bake a bigger pie. So let's create value that we can both win from. It
reminds me a little bit about a conversation I had with a guy who was CPO of a telecoms company in Europe, who was developing something that he would refer to as collaborative KPIs to manage outsourced relationships. Is that a key part of this as well, making sure that the supplier and the buyer are all working towards the same goal by these types of methodologies?
Absolutely. Goal alignment is absolutely critical, and we call that desired outcomes. So you're creating mutual, symbiotic desired outcomes, and you're crafting your relationship and your deal structure where you're both trying to achieve the same objectives. And when you do that, you both come out better for it.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Kate. It's been a pleasure, and I'm sure you'll get lots more interest in your book, and good luck for the future.
Thank you.
Okay, good.